name was Josie Hartwell. She was 19 years old, and on the morning they buried her father, her stepmother pressed a tin cup of graveyard dirt into her hands in front of the whole town. Lavinia held it out like a gift. Dry dust, scraped from the lip of the open grave. She curled Josie's fingers around the cold tin and smiled for the mourners to see. That, she said, was the girl's whole inheritance. Josie did not cry. She looked down at the cup. Then she slid her other hand into her coat and closed it around a small worn book, her father's tally book, the ledger of every head of cattle he ever owned. She kept the book. She let the dust be. 3 days later, in the parlor of the ranch house her father built with his own hands, before near 40 neighbors and every hired man on the payroll, Lavinia unfolded a paper and read it out loud. It gave the ranch to herself. It gave the herd to her son. And when she was done reading, she looked straight at Josie, and she smiled that same smile, and she said the words the whole county would remember. "You'll get nothing but dust, girl. Your daddy finally saw what I always did." Now, Josie knew something Lavinia did not. 3 weeks before the fever took him, her father had saddled up alone and ridden 2 days to the county seat. To set some papers straight, he'd said, with the circuit lawyer. He never told anyone why. He came home tired and quiet, and he never spoke of it again. Josie said nothing about that either. She just went out to the corral, and she opened her father's tally book, and she began to plan how to move 1,200 head of cattle 400 miles north, because that was the only thing that could save them all. If you have ever been treated as invisible by your own family, this story is for you. Before we ride on, if stories like this one find something true in you, take a second and subscribe. And do me one kindness, leave a comment and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I read them all. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Cedar Fork Country, Texas, the year was 1874. Amos Hartwell built his spread out of nothing but grit and a borrowed bull. He came to that dry fold of land with a wagon, a wife who did not live to see the second winter, and a baby girl wrapped against the cold. He dug a soddy into the hillside and lived in the earth like a badger for 2 years. He worked. That was the whole of it. The man worked. By the time Josie was old enough to remember, the soddy was a barn, and there was a real house of milled lumber standing where the dugout had been. Cattle spread across the grass in the thousands. Not because Amos was lucky. Because he never stopped. He raised the girl the way he raised the herd, close and steady, and without any softness that would get her killed. Josie learned to sit a horse before she learned her letters. She learned to read a cow's mood off the set of its ears and the swing of its tail. By 12, she was keeping her father's tally book in her own careful hand, every head counted, every brand marked, every sick calf, and every birth written down in ink that smelled of coal oil. She could rope. She could brand. She could doctor a downed cow at midnight in the rain, with her sleeves rolled to the elbow and her arms slick to the shoulder. The old hands watched her and said little, but they said it to each other. "That girl," they said, "can read a bawling herd better than a grown man." She rode like she was part of the horse. She thought like the cattle thought. And she loved her father the way you love the only steady thing in a hard world. 6 years back, Amos had married again. A woman named Lavinia, come up from town with fine manners and a grown son and a way of smiling that never reached her eyes. Amos was lonesome and getting on, and Lavinia was handsome, and he did not look too close. Josie looked. Josie saw. But she was 13 then, and no one asks a 13-year-old girl what she sees. The son was Corwin, 24 now, town soft, with clean hands and a loud way of talking. He'd never sat a full day in the saddle in his life. He liked to lean on the corral rail and tell the hands how a thing ought to be done. The hands would nod and then do it right the moment he walked off. That was the family. And that spring, the family had a problem that had nothing to do with any of them and everything to do with all of them. The banknote. $4,000. borrowed against the land 2 years back to buy more grass and more stock in a good year. Do now and do hard. 60 days, the paper said. And there was only one way in all the world to raise $4,000 off a cattle ranch in 60 days. You gathered the season's herd, 1,200 head, fat off the spring grass, and you drove them north. 400 miles of dust and river and open country to the railhead at Halden, Kansas, where the buyers waited and the cattle cars stood ready, and the money was real. Amos had made that drive a dozen times. He knew every waterhole and every bad crossing between Cedar Fork and Halden by heart. He was going to make it once more. He'd said so at the supper table, marking the route on the back of an envelope, and Josie had leaned over his shoulder and named the river crossings back to him before his pencil got there, and he'd laughed and called her his best hand. Then, in the last cold week of that winter, before the grass had even greened, Amos Hartwell took a fever. It came fast, the way winter fevers do on a man who spent 40 years in the weather. One night he was hoarse at supper. 3 days later he could not lift his head off the pillow. Josie sat with him through all of it. She wrung out cloths and held water to his cracked lips and told him about the calves being borne down in the low pasture, because she thought the news of new life might pull him back. It did not pull him back. Near the end he was mostly out of his head with the heat of it, but there was one clear hour, late, when the house was quiet, and Lavinia had gone to her bed. Amos opened his eyes and found his daughter's face, and he took her hand. His grip was still strong. That surprised her. He held her hand, and he looked at her a long moment like he was trying to fix her in his memory, or fix something in hers. He said, "You keep the book, Josie, whatever comes. You keep my book." She said she would. She thought he meant the tally book. She thought he was wandering. She smoothed his hair back and told him to rest. He died a little before dawn, 3 weeks, almost to the day, after that quiet 2-day ride to the county seat that nobody thought to ask him about, and that nobody thought of again. They buried him on a gray morning with the wind coming cold off the flats. Josie did not weep at the graveside, and the town noticed, and the town judged her a little for it. They did not understand. Her grief had nowhere soft to go. It went into her hands instead. That very morning, before the burying, she had been down in the calving shed with her sleeves pushed up, working over a bull calf that had come weak and could not find its feet. She warmed it and rubbed its legs and got it sucking off a rag soaked in its mother's milk. She did not stop until the calf stood on its own and staggered to the cow. Then she washed the birth off her arms in the cold trough water, and she put on the borrowed black dress. Hers had never been made for funerals, and she went to bury her father dry-eyed because she had already spent everything she had on a calf that would live. That was the girl. Now here is what was done to her. It began at the funeral supper. The neighbors had come back to the house after the burying, as neighbors do, with covered dishes and low voices. Lavinia set a long table in the good room. She sat herself at the head of it, where Amos used to sit, and she put Corwin at her right hand. The neighbors filled in along the benches. It was a proper spread, ham and biscuits and 3 kinds of pie the church women had brought. Josie came in from washing up and stood a moment looking for her place. There was none at the table. Lavinia looked up at her, mild as milk, and said the family and the guests were seated and that the girl could take her plate in the kitchen with the help. She said it kindly. That was the cruelty of it. She said it in the same voice you'd use to tell a child to mind the step, and the neighbors heard it, and not one of them said a word, because it was the woman's house now, and grief makes cowards of good people. One person saw it plain for what it was. Old Gideon Marsh, the trail foreman, standing back by the door with his hat in his 2 hands. Gideon had ridden for Amos Hartwell 20 years. He'd taught Josie half of what she knew that her father hadn't. He watched Lavinia send that girl to eat with the hired help on the day they'd put her father in the ground, and his jaw went tight and hard as an anvil. But Gideon was a man who'd spent his life taking orders and holding his tongue, and he waited, the way he always waited, for someone else to speak first. He did not speak. He would carry that silence a long way before the story was done. Josie took her plate to the kitchen. She ate standing up, by the stove, with the two hired women who would not meet her eye out of shame for her. She did not make a sound about it. But something in her went quiet and cold and started counting. That was the first offense. It was small, and it was private, and only Gideon saw. It would not be the last. Inside the week, Lavinia moved her out of the house. Josie had slept in the same little room off the kitchen since she was a girl, the one with the window that looked down toward the corrals where she could see the horses in the morning. Lavinia gave that room to Corwin's town trunks and told Josie she'd be more comfortable in the bunkhouse with the men, since she was always out there with them anyway. She said it like she was doing the girl a favor. She smiled while she said it. So Josie carried her things across the yard to the bunkhouse. The hands rigged a canvas curtain across one corner for her and turned their backs like gentlemen when she needed them turned, and none of them said the thing they were all thinking, which was that this was Amos Hartwell's daughter, and it was Amos Hartwell's bunkhouse, and by every law of decency it ought to be the other way around. Then Lavinia sold the mare. The mare was called Reuben's Girl, a long-legged blood bay that Amos had bred and broke and given to Josie on her 16th birthday. She was the best cutting horse on the place. She'd turn a steer on a dime and read a herd nearly as well as the girl who rode her. She was not the ranch's horse. She was Josie's, given free and clear, and everyone knew it. Josie came in off the range one evening and the mare was gone from the corral. A horse trader's wagon track led out the front gate. Lavinia said the animal had fetched a fair price, and the ranch could use the cash with the note coming due. She did not ask. She did not warn. She sold the girl's own horse out from under her and called it good sense. And then there was the ledger. The ranch book, not Josie's tally book, but the big ledger where the standing accounts were kept. The hands' wages and the stores and the head count of the outfit had a page at the front where the members of the household were listed. Amos had written Josie's name there himself, years back, in his square hand. Josie Hartwell, daughter, Corwin, took a pen to it one afternoon at the parlor desk. He was clumsy with a pen. Being town soft and not much of a writer, he drew a heavy line through her name and wrote nothing in its place, just struck her out, the way you'd cross off a debt that had been paid, or a beast that had died. Gideon was standing at the window when he did it. Gideon saw the line go through the girl's name. His jaw did that thing again, tightening down to stone. His hand closed slow around the brim of his hat, and still, God forgive him, he would think later, still he said nothing. He waited. He always waited. 3 offenses now: the kitchen, the bunkhouse, and the mare. The struck-out name. Each one bigger than the last. And through every one of them, Lavinia wore the same smile. That town smile that curved her mouth and left her eyes cold and flat as pond ice. You would do well to remember that smile. It is going to matter, later, when it finally falls. Josie bore all of it without a word, not because she was meek, because she was counting, and because she had not yet found the lever that would let her move any of it. Then came the reading of the will, and the lever came looking for her. Lavinia made a day of it. That was the part that told you what she was. A decent woman reads a will quiet, with the family and the lawyer and closed doors. Lavinia sent word all up and down Cedar Fork country that the last testament of Amos Hartwell would be read at the ranch house of a Sunday afternoon, and that neighbors were welcome. She wanted an audience. She wanted the whole county to see the thing settled and settled her way, so that no man could ever say after that the girl had been cheated in a corner. They came, near 40 of them. Neighbors in their Sunday clothes, ranchers Amos had trailed cattle beside, women from the church, and the whole Hartwell outfit lined along the back wall, every hired hand, and Gideon Marsh at the head of them with his hat in his hands. The good room was packed to the walls. They'd brought chairs in from the kitchen, and still men stood. Lavinia sat at the front by the cold hearth with a folded paper in her lap, and Corwin standing at her shoulder, trying to look like a man who owned things. She let the room settle. She let the quiet build until it had weight. She was good at that. Then she opened the paper and read. It was short. Wills that cheat somebody usually are. It gave the whole of the Hartwell spread, the land, the house, the improvements, to his beloved wife Lavinia. It gave the herd, all 1,200 head, and the outfit and its gear, to his son Corwin Abelson. To the daughter Josie, it said, the sum of nothing, for reasons the family understood. The room made a low sound when she read that part. Not quite words, just the breath of 40 people who all knew Amos Hartwell and all knew his girl, and all knew in their bones that this was wrong, and none of whom would stand up in another person's parlor and say so. Lavinia folded the paper back along its crease. And then, she did the thing she had been saving. She reached beside her chair and lifted up a little tin cup. A camp cup, dented, the kind every cowhand owned. It was full to the brim with dry gray dirt. She held it out toward Josie across the crowded room. She wanted them all to watch. Here, girl, she said. So you'll not go away empty-handed. A cup of good Hartwell earth off your daddy's own grave. You'll get nothing but dust. Your daddy finally saw what I always did. And she smiled. That smile. The cold one. She smiled it out over the whole room like a woman well pleased with her afternoon. Nobody breathed. 40 people watched to see the girl break. Josie crossed the room. Her boots were loud on the plank floor in all that quiet. She walked right up to Lavinia, and she looked at the cup of grave dust held out to her. And she did not take it. She reached instead into her coat and drew out the small worn book she carried everywhere, her father's tally book, soft-cornered from 10 years of handling. She held it up just enough that the front rows could see what it was. Then she put it away again, against her heart. She said, real quiet, so quiet the men in back leaned in to hear it. I'll keep his book. You keep the dust. And she turned her back on the smile and walked out of the house. Behind her the room let out its breath all at once. Lavinia sat there with the cup still held out to nothing and the smile still on her mouth, but a little fixed now. A little too long, because the girl had not broken and 40 witnesses had seen that too. Out at the corral, alone, with the afternoon sun laying long across the empty pens where her mare used to stand, Josie opened the tally book. She had opened that book 1,000 times. She knew every dog-eared page of it. But she opened it now the way a person opens a door in the dark, feeling for something, because of what her father had said at the last, with that strong grip on her hand. You keep my book, Josie, whatever comes. You keep my book. She'd thought he was wandering. Now she was not so sure he'd been wandering at all. Down near the back, tucked into the seam of the binding where the last written page met the blank ones, there was a fold of paper. It had not been there before. It was thicker than the leaves of the book, and it was water-stained along one edge, brown and rippled, like it had been carried a long way in the weather. Folded small, folded to hide. Josie's fingers found it and went still. She did not open it. Not there. Not with the parlor windows behind her full of 40 people, and Lavinia's smile still hanging in the air, and Corwin liable to come strutting out to the corral any minute to see if the town's soft owner of 1,200 cattle could figure out which end of a steer to point north. She closed the book on the paper. She slid it back inside her coat, against her heart, next to nothing at all, because nothing at all was what she had. But her pulse was going now. For the first time in a week of dust and insults, something in her had come alert. Her father had ridden 2 days to the county seat to set some papers straight and told no one why. And here in his book, in his last words to her, was a folded page he'd hidden with his own hands. She did not know yet what it said. But she knew the shape of hope when it pressed against her ribs. She would need it. Because while she stood at the corral holding a secret she hadn't yet read, Lavinia was inside the house selling everything out from under all of them. It came out over the next 2 days, the way things do on a ranch, through the hands who saw the wagon and the hands who overheard. There was a man come out from town more than once that spring. A cattle buyer named Silas Renner. He wore a good coat and a soft hat, and he never got dust on his boots, because he never went where the dust was. Renner did not buy cattle to trail them. Renner bought paper. He bought a man's trouble at 10 cents on the dollar and sold it back to him at a profit. And Renner and Lavinia had their heads together. Gideon Marsh was the one who heard the meat of it. He'd gone up to the house to ask the new owners a plain foreman's question, whether they meant to make the drive to Halden this season and when, so he could start gathering and road branding the herd, because 60 days was 60 days, and the grass would not wait. He came up on the porch quiet, the way an old hand does, and through the open window he heard Lavinia and Renner talking money. They were not going to make the drive. Lavinia had no stomach for 400 miles of dust and rivers, and no trust that Corwin could boss it, and no wish to wait 60 days for money when she could have it now. So she was going to sell the whole herd to Renner. Right there on the ranch. All 1,200 head, standing, delivered on the home range. At a distress price, $1 on cattle that would fetch 3 at the railhead. Cash in her hand inside the week. The banknote handled. The land cleared of stock, and cleared of the girl, and cleared of the whole troublesome outfit in one stroke. Gideon stood on that porch and heard the outfit he'd built with Amos Hartwell over 20 years get sold off like a wagon load of scrap at a thief's price to line a woman's pocket. He heard Renner laugh a soft town laugh, and the old man's hands shook on his hat brim, and his eyes stung, and he turned and walked back down to the corrals without a word, because he did not know how to fight this, and he had spent his whole life waiting for a Hartwell to tell him what to do. He found Josie by the branding fire, and he told her, lo, everything he'd heard. It was the first time in the whole business that any grown man had brought her the truth straight as to a person who might do something about it. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe because she was the last Hartwell left. Maybe because he'd watched her not break in the parlor. He told her, and then he stood there, twisting his hat, waiting, the way he always waited. Josie listened to all of it, without a flicker. When he was done, she looked into the fire a while. Here is where the pain in her turned into something else. You could almost see it happen. The grief and the insults and the grave dust, she had swallowed all of it and let it sit cold in her belly and counted. But this was different. This was not an insult to her. This was the end of everything her father made. The ranch, the herd, the hands who'd have no work and no wages, old Gideon with nowhere to go. Renner would take it all in a week, and the Hartwell brand would be dust for real, blown off a bare hillside where a soddy used to be. She was done being counted at. She had been waiting, like everyone around her, for permission to matter. That was her one blind spot, and she'd carried it her whole life, the notion that somebody had to hand her the right before she could take it. Sitting at that fire, she let it go. Nobody was coming to hand her anything but a cup of dust. That night, alone behind the canvas curtain in the bunkhouse, by the light of a single candle, she took out the tally book and she unfolded the water-stained page at last. It was her father's hand. Weaker than she'd ever seen it, the letters shaky, written by a sick man or a hurried one. But his. She knew it the way you know a voice in the dark. It did not say much. Amos Hartwell was never a man to use 2 words where one would carry the load. It said, Josie girl. If you're reading this, I'm gone and things have gone wrong, like I feared they might. Go to Elias Thorne, the circuit lawyer, at the county seat. Ask him for what's yours. He has it kept safe. Trust him and no other. Keep my book. Your pa. She read it 3 times. Then she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and sat very still, And if she cried that night, only the candle saw it, and the candle told no one. Her father had known. Somehow, before the fever, he had known the woman he married and the son she brought would try to take it all. And he had ridden 2 days to the county seat, sick already maybe, to set papers straight. He has it kept safe. Ask him for what's yours. There was something waiting at Elias Thorne's office that could undo Lavinia's smiling paper. She was near certain of it now. A truer will. A later one. Something, and she could not reach it. That was the cruelty of the thing, and she saw it clear that same night. The county seat was a week's hard ride to the east. Elias Thorne was a circuit lawyer, which meant right now, in the spring, he was not at the county seat at all. He was out riding the circuit, moving from settlement to settlement, holding court wherever the people needed law, gone for weeks at a stretch. And the spring rains had come. The rivers between Cedar Fork and the county seat were up and running, brown and mean. A rider might make it. A rider might not. And a rider who did might spend 2 weeks finding a lawyer who could be anywhere in 100 miles of muddy country. She did not have 2 weeks. She had, by Gideon's account, about 6 days before Renner's men came to take delivery of the herd. She could ride east chasing a lawyer she might never catch, and come home to find the cattle gone and the ranch sold, and nothing left to save. Or she could stay. So she sat behind the canvas curtain with her father's 2 secrets in her lap, the hidden note that promised justice a week's ride away up a flooded river, and the tally book that held the count of everything she stood to lose, and she made the only choice a Hartwell could make. If she couldn't reach the truth in time, she would make the truth not matter yet. Renner had bought a herd. Fine, let him come and find no herd to buy. She would put the cattle on the trail. She would drive them north herself, 1,200 head, 400 miles to Halden, and she would sell them honest at the railhead at $3, where they were worth $3, and she would pay the banknote with clean money before the 60 days ran out. The lawyer and the true will could catch up to her on the road, or catch up to her after. The ranch could not be sold out from under cattle that were already gone up the trail under the Hartwell brand, moving 400 miles from any parlor. It was near impossible. She knew it while she thought it. A green crew, an old foreman, and a 19-year-old girl the county had just watched get handed a cup of dirt. Against rivers and stampedes and a crooked buyer who'd want his cattle. Impossible. But it was a lever. It was the only lever in the whole world she had a grip on. And she meant to pull it. The trouble was that Lavinia held one card Josie could not simply take. Ownership. On paper, that day, the herd was Corwin's, and the land was Lavinia's, and Josie Hartwell was a struck-out name in a ledger who slept behind a curtain in the bunkhouse. She could not just order 1,200 head onto the trail. Not yet. Not with a word. So she did not go to Lavinia as a beggar or a rival. She went to her as bait. She walked up to the house the next morning, and she stood in the yard, and she made Lavinia an offer, plain and humble, with her hat in her hands like Gideon. She said she understood how things stood now. She said she asked only to be useful and earn her keep. She said the note was coming due, and the grass was good, and the season was right, and that the herd would fetch far more trailed to Halden than sold cheap at the door. Everyone knew that, and that she and old Gideon could take it north and bring the money home, and Lavinia and Corwin need not lift a hand nor risk a cent. She watched the greed and the arrogance war in Lavinia's face, and she watched arrogance win. Because arrogance always won with Lavinia. Here was the beauty of it, and Josie had counted on exactly this. Lavinia did not believe for one instant that a girl and an old man could actually move 1,200 head to Kansas. She thought it would fail. She thought the herd would scatter at the first river and come straggling home to be sold to Renner at an even sorrier price, with the troublesome girl humbled and the blame all hers. And in the meantime it cost Lavinia nothing to say yes and look to the 40 watching neighbors, like a fair woman giving her poor stepdaughter a chance. But Lavinia was not a complete fool. She wanted insurance. She would let the drive go, but not under the girl. It would go under Corwin. Corwin would be trail boss. Her son would hold the title and the say-so, and the girl would ride under him as a hired hand. And whatever came of it, the command stayed in Lavinia's blood. So she smiled that flat, cold smile, and she said yes. She would allow it. Corwin would boss the drive to Halden, and the girl could go along and make herself useful, and they would see, wouldn't they, what the little cowhand was truly worth. She said it in front of Corwin, who puffed up like a barn cat, and started at once telling Gideon how he meant to run things. She said it, most important of all, where two of the churchwomen could hear, because Lavinia never did a thing without witnesses to prove her generous. Josie kept her eyes down and her voice meek and said, "Thank you, ma'am." And inside, cold and clear, she thought, "You have just signed the herd onto the trail with your own mouth, in front of your own witnesses, and you do not even know what you've done." They gathered for 3 days. 1,200 head off the spring range, bawling and dusty, road branded and counted. Josie counted them herself, into her father's book, in her father's own careful column, because whatever the parlor paper said, this was still her outfit, and this was still her book. Gideon rode beside her the whole 3 days and took her orders as easy as breathing, and called her nothing. Not boss, not miss, just handed her the outfit one quiet decision at a time. The hands watched which of the two Hartwells actually knew where every steer and every waterhole and every weak spot in the herd was, and they were not fools either. On the 4th morning, before light, they pointed 1,200 head north. Corwin rode at the front in a new hat, telling everyone he was trail boss. Josie rode the swing, where the real work was, with her father's tally book buttoned in her coat and a folded, water-stained note beside it, and a lawyer she could not reach somewhere out east across the flooded rivers, and 56 days now, to put clean money in a banker's hand or lose everything her father ever built. The first day went easy. Flat grass, fair weather, the cattle strung out and trailing quiet. Corwin got bold on the easy miles and started to believe his own hat. Then, near noon of the second day, the country ahead of them turned to trees and the sound of water, and they came up over a low rise, and there it was. The first river. Brown and swollen bank to bank with the spring melt, running fast and deep and cold, wide as a barn was long, the far shore a green smear through the haze. 1,200 head would have to swim it. Somebody would have to ride into that current at the point and give the lead steers a body to follow, or the whole herd would mill and pile and drown on the near bank. Corwin drew up on the rise and looked at that water. And all the color went out of his town's soft face. Corwin sat his horse and did not move. The river ran on without him. "Well?" Josie said. She rode up beside him at the point. "The lead steers are coming to the water. They'll smell it in a breath. Somebody has to be out ahead of them when they do." He wet his lips. His new hat threw a shadow over eyes that had gone small and wet. "It's too high," he said. We wait. We wait for it to drop. It won't drop for a week. We don't have a week. Then, we go around. There's no around. Not for 400 miles of this water. You know that. You'd know it if you'd ever ridden it." The herd was strung out behind them for near a mile, 1,200 head, and every one of them thirsty and trail-worn, and looking for a place to drink. The front rank hit the mud of the near bank and slowed and milled, the way cattle do when the ground turns strange under their feet. A steer bawled. Then another. The sound ran back through the herd like a match down a line of powder. That was the moment. Josie knew it the way she knew weather. Cattle at a swollen crossing will either follow one brave body into the current, or they'll turn and pile and drown on the bank, hundreds of them, in the time it takes to say a prayer. She looked at Corwin one more time. He was trail boss. His name was on the paper Lavinia signed. This was his to lead, and every hand on the drive was watching to see if he would. He backed his horse. He backed it clean away from the water. "Someone do something," he said, and his voice cracked in the middle of it like a boy's. So Josie did. She drove her heels in and put her horse down the bank at a run, past the milling front rank, straight into the brown water. It hit her legs cold as a knife. The horse dropped from under her and then swam, and she felt it swimming, felt the great muscles working under the saddle, and she turned its head to the far shore and gave the lead steer a body to follow. "Hiya," she called back over her shoulder. Come on, you." The big brindle lead steer that had walked point since Cedar Fork stood at the edge of the mud and bawled and looked at her out there in the river. And then he came. He came off the bank and into the water and struck out after her, and behind him came the next, and the herd that had been about to turn and pile now had a line to follow. A girl and a horse and a brindle steer, all swimming, and it strung out behind her across that river like beads pulled onto a thread. Gideon Marsh was in the water on the downstream side before she'd gone 20 feet, holding the line, turning back any steer that drifted. She never told him to. He just came. The other hands took the swing and the drag and pushed the herd on and held it tight, and the whole 1,200 head went into that river and swam it and climbed out dripping and blowing on the far green bank, and not one was lost. Not one. Josie came up out of the water last, her father's tally book buttoned dry against her chest under an oilskin she'd thought to tie there before dawn. She was shaking with the cold. She did not let them see it. Corwin crossed at the tail end, roped between two of the hands like baggage, white and silent and soaked through. Nobody called him boss after that. Nobody said a word about it. They didn't have to. That evening, when there were orders to give, where to bed the herd, who took first guard, how far the next water lay, the hands came and stood in a loose half circle and looked at Josie, just looked at her, and waited. And she gave the orders out of her father's book, and they went and did them. Gideon built her a little fire apart from the others and set the coffee on it and did not say she'd done well. That wasn't his way. What he said, staring into the coals, was, "Your daddy turned a herd across the red the same way. Year of the big water. Went in first. I was on the downstream side of him too. He was quiet a while. 20 years I rode for that man. Never rode for anybody could do it like him. Till tonight." Josie held her cold hands to the fire and said nothing, because if she'd tried to speak just then, she'd have wept, and there was no time yet for weeping. There'd be time when the note was paid. Not before. 52 days now, and the country ahead only got harder. The dry camp came 4 nights on. They'd made good miles across the high plains, but the water holes Josie's father had marked in the tally book were low or gone, one after another, and by the 4th day the herd was strung out thirsty and fractious, and the grass had turned to dust under 1,200 sets of hooves. They bedded down that night on a dry flat, with no water within half a day's push, and the cattle were restless on the bed ground, up and down, lowing, milling. Josie didn't like the sky. There was a green weight to it out west, low along the horizon, a stillness that pressed on the ears. She'd seen it before, riding with her father. She knew what it meant. "Double the night guard," she told Gideon. "Everybody rides tonight. Nobody sleeps." Corwin too, Corwin, from the tail of the wagon where he'd taken to riding and sleeping both, said, "There's not a cloud." "You'd wear the men out over nothing." "There's a storm behind that stillness," Josie said. "It'll come with no rain and all thunder. And a thirsty herd on a dry flat is a barrel of powder waiting on a spark. Ride, or get in the wagon and stay out of the way." He got in the wagon. It came near midnight. One crack of dry lightning, close, a blue-white tear across the whole sky, and a clap of thunder right on its heels that Josie felt in her teeth. and 1,200 head came up off the bedground all at once, as one animal, and ran. There is no sound on this earth like a herd stampeding in the dark. It is the ground itself turned to thunder, hooves and horns and the crash of bodies, and you cannot see it, you can only hear it and feel it coming up through your horse's legs into your own spine. A man who has never heard it does not know fear. A man who has heard it once does not forget. Josie was already mounted. She'd slept in the saddle, the way her father taught her, the way you do when the sky looks like that. She rode straight for the sound. Turn 'em. She was shouting. Get the lead and turn 'em into a mill. Don't let 'em run straight, they'll run to the coulee and pile up. Turn 'em. To turn a stampede, you ride up alongside the leaders in the black dark, at a dead run, over ground you cannot see, with a wall of terrified cattle beside you that will trample you into paste if your horse puts a foot wrong. And you press them, you crowd the leaders, bend them, curl the head of the run back toward its own tail, until the whole herd is running in a great circle, a mill, running against itself till it winds down and stops. That is the only way. There is no other. Josie rode it. Gideon rode the other side. The hands came up out of the dark, 1 and 2 at a time, and took their places along the running herd. And slowly, slowly, over ground broken with prairie dog holes and gullies, in the dark, they bent that run. She felt the lead steers give under the pressure of her horse. She felt them start to curl. She kept crowding, hoarse from shouting, her hat gone somewhere back in the dark, and the herd curved and folded in on itself and became a mill, a great slow spinning wheel of horn and dust, and then it was only cattle, milling and blowing and bawling, and then it was only cattle standing, and it was done. They lost 9 head down a cutbank. 9 out of 1,200. A herd could run itself to ruin on a night like that, lose 200, lose the drive. They lost 9. When the gray light came, Josie counted them from the book, every one, and found the tally short by 9, and knew where those 9 had gone and marked it, and her hand was steady doing it. Corwin climbed down from the wagon into the cold morning and looked at the standing herd and at the men gray-faced and swaying in their saddles, and he understood, maybe for the first time, what it was these people did. What his mother had signed him up to pretend to be. He didn't say anything. But he saddled his own horse that morning, and he took a place in the drag where the dust was worst and the work was meanest, and he rode it without being told. It didn't make Josie forgive him. But she marked that too, in her own way. 46 days. The trailing rider they first saw on the 9th day out from the dry camp. A single horseman, far back, holding to the low ground, keeping the herd's dust between himself and the outfit. Josie saw him at mid-morning. She saw him again at dusk. Gideon saw him and said nothing but loosened the rifle in his scabbard. On the 2nd day he was still there, hanging back, neither closing nor falling away. Renner's man, Gideon said low. Come to see where his cattle's got to. They're not his cattle. He thinks they are. Your stepmother took his money on him. Paper says he owns 1,200 head of Hartwell beef. Gideon spat. He'll want to take delivery. And a man like Renner don't take delivery honest if he can take it cheap. He came the next night. Not the lone rider, 6 of them, and the lone rider guiding them in. They came at the drift fence. The country there ran through a broad natural funnel between 2 rocky breaks, and some old cattleman years back had strung a drift fence across the open ground to hold trail herds from wandering at night. Josie had bedded the herd against it, using it the way it was meant to be used, a wall on one side so she needed fewer guards. In the small hours Renner's men cut it. They cut the wire in 3 places and came in quiet on foot to fire off pistols in the herd's face and scatter 1,200 head to the 4 winds across broken country, so that Renner could gather them at his leisure in the days after and call them his own. They had not counted on Josie bedding light and sleeping saddled. They had not counted on Gideon Marsh, who had smelled the thing coming since noon and set 2 men out in the rocks against just this. The first pistol shot brought her up and mounted in the space of a breath. But this time the herd did not run wild. Gideon's 2 men were already at the point, already turning the leaders back off the cut fence before the run could build. And Josie came in on the flank and read in one glance what was happening. These weren't cattle spooked by weather. This was men, on foot, in her herd, in the dark, riders in the herd. She shouted, "Hold the point, Gideon, the fence." What followed was not a battle. It was cow work, done hard and fast in the dark by people who knew how, against men who did not. Josie and Gideon and the hands closed the herd up tight against the standing part of the fence and held it milling, denied the scatter, while the 2 men in the rocks put rifle fire over the heads of Renner's crew, not to kill, just to teach them that the dark held guns that could see them, and they could not see back. Renner's men had come to spook cattle, not to trade lead with cowhands who had the high ground. They broke. They ran for their horses and were gone, and the lone guide rider with them, and the herd was held, whole, milling and bawling against the fence, and the sun came up on Josie Hartwell, sitting her horse in the gap of the cut wire, with the tally book against her chest, and not one head lost. She had the fence mended by noon. She had a hand ride the back trail to be sure Renner's crew was truly gone. And that evening she sat by the fire and did a thing she had not done since the parlor. She took out the folded, water-stained note. She'd read it once, back at Cedar Fork, in the corral in the dark, and folded it away again because reading it hurt too much to do twice on the ranch her father built. But now, out here, with the herd she'd fought a river and a storm and 6 armed men to hold, she took it out and read it again by firelight, in her father's careful, dying hand. "Josie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry for it. I did a foolish thing marrying where I did, and I've spent my last strength setting it right. Ride to Elias Thorne at the county seat. Ask him for what's yours. It's all there, girl. It was always yours. You're the only one of mine who can bring the herd home. Bring it home." Pa, she read it 3 times. Then she folded it away, and she looked north into the dark toward Halden, and she said, so quiet only Gideon might have heard, "I'm bringing it home. Pa." 40 days. Then 30. Then the country began to green and level, and the far-off smoke of a railhead town smudged the northern sky, and on the 56th day out from Cedar Fork, with 4 days left on the note, and every one of 1,200 heads still wearing the Hartwell brand, Josie Hartwell trailed her herd down onto the holding grounds at Halden, Kansas, and the stage from the south was already there. They were waiting for her at the pens. Lavinia, in a traveling dress the color of a bruise, sitting a hired buggy with her back straight and her chin high. Silas Renner beside her, a heavy, soft man with a gold chain across his belly and a leather folder under his arm. And ringed around them, the railhead buyers, 3 of them, cattlemen in good coats with their tally clerks, come down to the pens at word that a big herd was in. Lavinia was smiling. It was the same smile. Josie had told herself she'd forgotten it, out on the trail, but she hadn't. It was the smile from the graveside, from the parlor, thin and certain and pleased with itself, the smile of a woman who has already counted her winnings. "Josie," Lavinia said, warm as poison, loud enough for the buyers to hear. "You've done a wonder, truly, brought them all this way. But you've saved yourself the trouble of not knowing what to do with them. These cattle are sold. Mr. Renner holds the contract, signed and paid, 1,200 head of Hartwell beef. He'll take delivery here." She turned to the buyers with the smile widened. "This girl is a hand of ours, a good hand, but she has no more standing to sell these cattle than the horse she rode in on. The will's plain. The ranch and all its stock came to me and my son. I have it here." Renner stepped forward and laid his leather folder on the plank table the buyers used for their counting, and opened it, and there it was, Lavinia's will. and Renner's distress contract clipped behind it. "It's all in order, gentlemen," Renner said, oily and sure. "I'd not want any man here buying stolen goods. The seller of record is Mrs. Hartwell. The girl's got no name on any paper at all." The buyers looked at the papers. They looked at Josie, mud to the waist, hollow-eyed, 56 days on the trail, the tally book in her dirty hand. And she felt the whole thing tilting toward Lavinia, the way it had tilted in the parlor, the way it always tilted, because the paper said so, and the paper was in Lavinia's hand. Josie opened her mouth. And she did not, in that moment, know what she was going to say. Because her father's note said ride to Thorn, and Thorn was a week's ride out on a flooded circuit, and she had not reached him. And all she had was a herd and a book and the truth had no signature on it. Then a horse came off the back trail at a stumbling, blowing walk, and a man half fell out of the saddle. He was mud to the knees and passed, mud on his coat, mud in his gray whiskers, his boots ruined, his horse near foundered. He'd been the lone rider. 2 days he'd trailed the herd, unable to close the gap on a spent horse and a flooded country. He came up to the plank table on foot, wheezing, and he set down a flat oilcloth packet, and he wiped his face with a filthy hand, and he said, "Am I in time? Tell me I'm in time. Which of you is the county buyer? I'm Elias Thorne, circuit lawyer, out of the county seat down in Texas, and I have here the last will and testament of Amos Hartwell, the true one, filed and witnessed at my office 18 days before the man died, and it supersedes every scrap of paper that woman is holding." The holding grounds went dead quiet. Even the cattle seemed to hush. Lavinia's smile did not fall. "Not yet." "That's a lie," she said. "There's one will. I read it myself." "You read a will your husband made 2 years gone," Thorne said, and he was getting his breath now, and his voice was steadying into something dry and hard and lawyerly. He made another. "He rode 2 days to my office to make it, 3 weeks before the fever took him. You'll recall he was gone 2 days, and never said why. I'll tell you why." He untied the oilcloth. He drew out the paper, and it was heavy paper, and it had seals on it, and ribbon, the kind of paper a court respects. He knew what you were. He couldn't unmarry you, but he could see to it you never got your hands on what he built for his girl. "Gentlemen, may I read it?" It's short. He was a plain man. The head buyer, a tall Kansan named Cole with a white mustache, looked at Lavinia, and looked at the seals on that paper, and said, "Read it." And Elias Thorne read the true will of Amos Hartwell aloud at the Halden pens, in the dusk, before the buyers and the tally clerks and every hand on the drive who had drifted up quiet and close to hear it. It was short. It left Lavinia and her son Corwin a fixed annuity, a fair sum, paid yearly, and nothing more. Not the land, not the herd, not a foot or a hoof of it. The Cedar Fork Ranch and every head of stock upon it passed, entire, to Amos's daughter, Josie Hartwell. And then Thorne read the last of it, and he read it slow, because Amos had wanted it read slow. "And it is my will," Thorne read, "that my daughter Josephine Hartwell be named trail boss of my outfit, and shall have sole command of the drive north and the sale of the season's herd, for she alone among mine can bring the herd home. Let no one ride ahead of her. Let no one countermand her. She has been ready since she was a girl of 13 keeping my book." I was only slow to say so. Thorne lowered the paper, and Lavinia's smile fell. It went off her face like water off a slate, all at once and complete, and it did not come back. She stood in the hired buggy with her mouth a little open and her certain chin gone slack, and for the first time since the graveside Josie saw her not smiling, saw her afraid, saw her small. "That paper's forged," Lavinia said, "but it came out thin. He was sick, he wasn't in his mind, he was in his mind 18 days before he sickened," Thorne said. 2 witnesses, my clerk and the county recorder. Both will swear. It's filed with the court, Mrs. Hartwell. A copy's in the courthouse vault this minute. You can contest it if you like. You'll lose, and you'll pay the costs out of your annuity." He turned his back on her, which was its own kind of verdict, and he faced the buyers. "Gentlemen, the seller of record is Miss Josie Hartwell. She, and only she, can sell you these cattle. And by the look of them, she's brought you 1,200 head across 400 miles of hard country in 56 days, with the brand still on every one. I'd say she's earned the market price, wouldn't you?" Cole, the head buyer, folded his arms and looked at Josie a long moment. Then he stepped around the plank table and put out his hand to her. To her, first, before any paper was signed. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Cole, out of the KP yards, I've been buying trail herds 20 years. I've seen 'em come in gaunt, and I've seen 'em come in fat, but I don't often see one come in whole after the spring rivers, and I never yet saw one bossed by a girl of 19. He shook her hand. "Once, firm, I'll buy your herd. Full market. Every head, weighed honest on my own scale tomorrow, and cash on the barrelhead against it tonight if you've a note to meet." "I have a note to meet," Josie said. Her voice did not shake. She'd earned the right to a steady voice, and she used it. $4,000, due at the bank in Cedar Fork in 4 days. I'll take enough of the sale here tonight to wire it clear." "Done," said Cole. And it was done, right there on the plank table in the dusk, the great sale her father had planned at his own supper table before the fever took him, 1,200 head at full Kansas market. Weighed and paid, the money counted out in front of the same buyers Silas Renner had meant to swindle. Enough to pay the $4,000 note 3 times over and keep the ranch clear, and the hands paid, and money left to winter on. Renner tried once more. He was a buyer. The plank table and the counting out was his own country, and he could not help himself. He slid his distress contract across the boards toward Cole. "You'll honor a prior contract, Cole, as a matter of the trade. I bought this herd first. 1,200 head. At the price named here, you bought it," Cole said, without picking up the paper, "from somebody who never owned it." He slid the contract back across the plank, unsigned, the length of the table, until it slipped off the end and Renner had to catch it against his belly. "That's not a sale, Renner. That's a swindle with a signature on it. And there's a deputy marshal in this town takes an interest in men who forge a claim on another man's cattle." He nodded past Renner's shoulder. A lean man with a star had come up quiet at the edge of the lantern light and was writing something in a little book. "I'd not linger at these pens, was I you." Silas Renner looked at the deputy. He looked at Lavinia, who would not meet his eye now, who had nothing for him, whose whole scheme had come apart in a lawyer's dry voice. He picked up his worthless contract and put it in his leather folder, and he got on his horse without another word, and he rode out of Halden alone, into the dark, going south. And no one watched him go but Josie, who watched him all the way out because her father would have wanted to know he was truly gone. That left Corwin. Corwin had stood the whole while at the edge of the crowd, in the dust of the drag, still in the clothes he'd worn riding the meanest place in the outfit for 3 weeks. He'd stopped calling himself boss, somewhere back at the river. He didn't try to speak now. When Josie's eye fell on him, he only looked at the ground, a soft town boy who'd been handed a title he never earned, and had it stripped from him in front of 40 strangers, and every man who'd watched him fail to ride into a river. There was no more cruelty needed there. The trail had already done it. She let him be. And that left Lavinia. She came down out of the buggy at last, because Thorne had crossed to her with a second paper, the annuity, her whole inheritance now, a fixed yearly sum and not 1 acre. He held it out to her the way, and Josie saw it, and knew Josie's father would have seen it too, wherever he was, the way Lavinia had once held out a tin cup of grave dirt to a girl in a borrowed black dress. "Your annuity, Mrs. Hartwell," Thorne said. "It's fair. It's more than fair. It's more than you'd have left the girl, I think. The ranch answers to Miss Hartwell now. So does the outfit. So do you, in any matter touching the land, until the day you take your money and go. Lavinia took the paper. Her hand closed on it. And Josie stepped up in front of her stepmother, in front of the buyers and the clerks and the whole trail crew and the deputy with his little book, the whole railhead crowd that had heard, by now, the whole story, the dust cup and the parlor and the river and all of it, and Josie did not shout. And she did not gloat. And she did not smile. She just said it. Dry and quiet and level, the way her father said the things that mattered most. The herd moves home at first light, Josie said. I'll want the hands rested and the wagon provisioned by dawn. As for you and Corwin, you'll ride drag. Or you'll ride the stage. But you'll not ride ahead of me again. That was all. No more than that. She turned around, and there was nothing left to say to Lavinia Hartwell, and everyone standing there knew it. And the not saying was louder than any curse. Lavinia looked down at the annuity paper in her hand, and she folded it slow into a small square. And she put it in the very hand that had once held the cup of dust out to a grieving girl, and left it hanging in the air with no one to take it. She took the stage. Of course she took the stage. She was on it before the sun was fully up, going east, and Corwin surprised them. Corwin did not take the stage. Corwin saddled his horse in the gray dawn and rode drag, at the tail of the herd, in the worst of the dust, all the long way home to Cedar Fork, under the command of the girl he'd mocked. Maybe it was the only decent thing he ever did. Josie let him do it. A man has to start somewhere, and drag is as good a place as any. They wired the $4,000 to the Cedar Fork bank that same night. Josie stood in the little telegraph office at Halden and watched the key tap it out, and heard the answer come back, paid in full, account clear, and she walked out into the street and stood there in the dark a while by herself. And then, finally, with the note paid and the ranch saved and no one to see, Josie Hartwell put her face in her father's tally book and wept. Just for a minute. Just once. Then she wiped her face and went to see about her horses, because there was a herd to point south in the morning, and she was the trail boss, and it said so on a paper filed in a courthouse vault, and it had said so in her father's heart for 6 years before that. Autumn came gold to the Cedar Fork country. The cottonwoods along the creek turned the color of a struck match, and the grass cured tall and pale on the flats, and the air had that clean, cold edge to it in the mornings that says the year is turning. The note was paid, and the deed was clear, and it carried one name now, in the county recorder's careful hand. Josephine Hartwell. She sat the porch her father built, of an evening, the tally book open on her knee out of habit more than need, watching the near corral. Gideon Marsh was in it, gray and unhurried, breaking a green colt with his hands and his patience, the way he'd broken horses for Amos 20 years, and would break them for Amos's girl 20 more if his bones held. Down at the branding fire, new hands, good ones, hired honest and paid fair, worked the fall calves, and their voices carried up thin and easy in the cooling air. The ranch had wintered before it ever reached winter. There was money in the bank and beef on the range, and a full crew, and a name on the deed that would hold. On the windowsill by the door there sat a tin cup. It was empty. It had once held a measure of graveyard dirt, pressed into a girl's hand at a funeral as a cruel joke, her whole inheritance. Nothing but dust. Josie had kept it. Not out of bitterness. She'd carried it home 400 miles, and one spring morning she'd walked out into the home pasture, the deeded ground, her ground, and she'd tipped the cup and let the wind take the dust across the grass her father cleared, and the land her father built, and the country that was hers now, every acre of it, free and clear, so that the nothing but dust she'd been promised turned out to be the very ground she owned. Every handful of it, as far as she could ride in a day. She'd heard Lavinia went east on her annuity and settled in some town where nobody knew the story, and drew her fair yearly sum, and was not, by any account that reached Cedar Fork, much missed. That was all Josie ever said about her, when anyone asked, which was seldom. Went east. Wasn't missed. A dry line for a cold woman, and no more than she'd earned. Josie thought sometimes about the note in the tally book, and the 2-day ride her father made to the county seat, sick already maybe, and knowing it, to set his papers straight. A man's true measure of his child is a quiet thing. It doesn't smile for a crowd. It doesn't read loud in a parlor. It waits, folded and sealed in a lawyer's vault, dated and witnessed, ready for the day it's needed. It outlasts a stepmother's smile. It outlasts a forged page. Her father never once told her, in life, that he thought she could boss his outfit and bring his herd home. He was slow to say so, he wrote. But he wrote it down, where it would hold, and he trusted her to earn it before she was ever handed it, and she had. On a river and a dry flat and a cut fence, she had. The colt gentled under Gideon's hands. The branding fire threw up its sparks against the coming dark. Josie closed the tally book, her father's book, her book now, and rested her hand flat on the cover a moment. Then she got up to go see about the calves. Because the light was going and the work was never quite done, and that was fine by her. That was the whole of what she'd fought for. The work, and the ground under it, and the right to do it in her own name. There was one town child, a barefoot girl who'd brought Josie a dipper of water once at the funeral, when no one else would cross Lavinia to be kind. Josie had hired her mother on to cook that fall, and she held the ranch house door for that child every time, and never once for anyone who'd smiled at her the way Lavinia smiled. If you've ever been counted for nothing by your own blood and had to earn in the weather what should have been given at the table, you know why she scattered that dust and why she kept the cup. Tell me the name of your own town in the comments and where you're watching from tonight. I'd like to know who's out there.